for your thoughts on. We would ask that you please hold questions until the end of the session. And as you come in, please mute your microphones so that we can hear the presenters. Please give a warm welcome to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. Hope that technology continues to work. Can you all see my screen? Okay, perfect. So our session today is the power of family voice and systems change. So we're going to start today by talking a little bit about the why behind family engagement and leadership, as well as some systems thinking strategies that we feel are important. And then we'll move into the how with some tools and resources for effective and authentic family engagement and leadership. So we're going to do some quick introductions. So I'm Daphne Alcial, the Preschool Development Grant Manager with the North Carolina Partnership for Children. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Scott, who is my colleague from NCPC.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see all of you here, or at least know you're here in the room with us today, and happy to share hopefully some good resources for you to bring family voice to your tables and your communities. I am the Strategic Initiatives Director at the North Carolina Partnership for Children and work with Daphne there, and also get to collaborate with state and local partners such as Moms Rising. And we're happy that they're here to join us today. I'm going to pass it over to Beth Messersmith now. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me with you all. I always love the Smart Start Conference. As Mary said, I'm Beth Messersmith. I'm the State Director for Moms Rising. For those of you who don't know us already, we're a grassroots organization of, we say, moms and people who love them, who work on a broad range of children and family issues. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And I'm also bringing apologies from my colleague, Shayla Arias, who was supposed to be presenting with us this morning. She runs our Mamas con Poder effort doing Spanish language organizing, but she is sick this morning. So sending her good healing vibes, and I'm going to do my very best to fill in for her. So thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Daphne.
Mary, did you want to talk a little bit about Smart Start? Are we good to skip these?
Sorry, thank you. I didn't see that slide, but yes, absolutely. I think most of you know about Smart Start if you're here at this conference, but this is just a visual to show the areas that we cover, that it's 75 local partnerships covering 100 counties in North Carolina. And our mission is to advance a high quality, comprehensive, accountable system of care and education for each child, beginning with a healthy birth.
And I'll just chime in quickly to say a little more about Moms Rising. We are a national organization. We started in 2006. We have over 1 million members nationwide. We've got 47,000 folks here in North Carolina. We have folks in all 100 counties. And we work on a really broad range of issues, everything from early learning and support for the child care workforce to things like paid family and medical leave, hunger and food insecurity, the child tax credit, lots of different issues that affect children and families. It's free to be a member. If you want to check us out, it's momsrising.org. But fundamentally, what we believe is that the decisions that are made about children and families need to have families at the table in meaningful ways. And that's kind of the root of everything we're talking about this morning. So excited to share with you the things we've learned from our members. So I'll turn it back to you, Mary.
All right, so we're going to do a quick poll. So you heard a little bit about us and who we are. So we're going to do a quick poll. So if Courtney or Yvonne, if you can launch the poll for us. We just want to hear from you. Who are you? What sector are you from? Who do you represent? Looks like we have a lot of Smart Start Partnership staff. which is exciting to be expected since this is a Smart Start conference. Give it a couple more minutes. All right, so it looks like we have about half in the room are Smart Start partnership staff or other Family Resource Center staff. And then about 22% are other. So if you want to put your role in the chat, just so we have an idea of who's in the room, that would be helpful. And about 15% are home visitors or parent educators. And 8% are case managers, service coordinators. 1% are early childhood mental health professionals. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thanks so much. Right, so family engagement is currently, the term family engagement is used in a lot of different ways with a lot of different meanings. And the goals of this particular session, as you probably read, are really to increase knowledge and understanding of strategies and to share resources that agencies can use to utilize and encourage cross-sector collaboration and how to engage family leaders in ways that advance systems change in local communities. So just want to get that out there in case, make sure you're in the right session here today. We're glad you're here with us. At Smart Start, the focus of family engagement and leadership is driven by the principle, nothing for us without us, and replacing doing to with doing with. And in order to realize significantly improved outcomes, including closing racial disparities, local early childhood systems must create space for those receiving services to influence those developing services. Family-led work addresses root causes and creates stronger systems of care. And we know this work is important. We know the why. That's why you're all here. You know that family leaders are important. You know that family engagement is important. And at the same time, it's really important to know how. And we have to be really intentional with this work. We have to learn ourselves, and then we have to lead the way in helping to shift mindsets, not only with ourselves and our community partners, but to also make sure that we're setting an intentional table to invite family leaders to. We don't want to invite family leaders to a table that's not ready for them, or with people who don't value them or don't see the reason or need for family leaders to be there. We also want to have structures in place to pay family leaders well for their time and to truly value their time and input, as well as help to invest in their leadership. For these reasons and more, back in 2019, I think you could go forward one if you'd like, Daphne, maybe. Back in 2019, North Carolina Partnership for Children received a preschool development grant to focus on family engagement and leadership, and worked with local Smart Start agencies to convene cross-sector coalitions in their own community around an early childhood issue of their choice. They each received some funding. They were offered one-on-one technical assistance with our staff, and were involved in a monthly community of practice, and ultimately created an action plan to use within their communities, within their local coalition. This first cohort of partnerships was also part of a larger family engagement and leadership, we call it FELC coalition, that was co-led by NCPC and our partners at the North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education, along with other partnering state agencies and family leaders. And this group developed the North Carolina Early Childhood Family Engagement and Leadership Framework. It's kind of a mouthful, but the reason was to help those Smart Start partnerships, as well as any other agencies, to be able to really embark on this work in their own local communities. And from there, NCPC then went on to create an action guide. And I believe you have all of the links to these in this session information, and possibly somebody might be putting them in the chat as well. But the reason we're telling you all this is because they're there for you to use. They're new. A lot of research went into it, a lot of planning, a lot of thought. Family leaders were at the table to help create it all along the way. And so they're free, and they're on our website for you to use in your own communities. And this slide here shows, I was just talking about the first cohort 1 of 10 local Smart Start partnerships, but this shows how over the course of the last couple of years, we've brought on more Smart Start partnerships to be a part of this preschool development grant work. And hopefully many of you are on the call today. And if you are, feel free to jump in the chat and share advice along the way. So we did a questionnaire of that first group of Smart Start partnerships to find out really what was helpful about that first year of embarking on this work. And we have some lessons learned that we'd like to share with you. We did a survey. And let's see if you want to, yeah, there you go. A few themes emerged from this survey. Those themes are here. So peer support and TA were definitely raised up as important. The Smart Start partnerships really found value in connecting with others in other communities and hearing what was working there, what was not working, how were they recruiting family leaders, how were they setting the table for them. So having that peer interaction was really, really helpful. And then also the one-on-one TA, where a Smart Start staff member was able to really help in those communities, specifically with their issues that they had going on. And then specifically with the framework and the action guide, it was lifted up that it's really a great use as a tool. And one person, I'm going to read a quote from her, one person described it really well, who was a part of that first cohort, when she said that it's like a roadmap. She said, the framework is just that. It provided a roadmap to guide the work so that a coalition is not going about the work blindly. It gives basic structure to the premise that we want our work to be family-centered and family-led. Agencies and businesses that work or touch the lives of families with young children ultimately want the same thing, for all children to be healthy and have the same access and opportunities that allow them to be successful in life. The framework addresses this and allows for families and partners to come together with the basic understanding of what the coalition will be working toward. The framework also provides common language that can be used to communicate with potential partners in the work and with family leaders that's consistent. So it's the language that we're using at the state level with state partners. And so the survey participants responded that it really helped them to use that same language, have that same language within their local communities. And then equity, of course, helps agencies to identify who needs to be at the table and encourages diverse representation, and it really intentionally including people with lived experience, and stresses the importance of making sure that all voices are heard. And then another thing that came up from the survey was the need for training resources. So the agency said peer support is wonderful, technical assistance is wonderful, the framework and action guide are really helpful. And we could use some training also on facilitation of these groups and also on training family leaders. And that's why we reached out to our partners and collaborators with Moms Rising to help us create some tools for these communities to be able to use within their own local coalitions. Again, those are free. Beth is going to talk a little bit about those later today, but they're all also on our website for you to access anytime you'd like. And next slide, please. Another thing we asked in the survey was, do they have any advice? Do those partnerships have any advice to other agencies who have some funding or not? If you don't have funding, how can you embark on this work? And this was their advice, was really to follow the framework and the action guide. It's there as a tool for you to use. Make sure that families are guiding the work and provide them with the training and support that they need to be able to do that. And also to help create buy-in. And one way to do that is to really think about what your topic is. So for instance, if you're wanting to look at NC Pre-K in your community, you might invite families whose children are in NC Pre-K program in your county to come together and help them to become leaders and give their input to the work. And we also asked family leaders what they were most excited about this work. And one person in particular who has been involved, it's a family leader who has been involved since the beginning in 2019. And I just love what she said. She said, "I look forward to bringing my kids along and raising our kids with active parents so that they grow up steeped in knowing that they have a voice too. And they are used to seeing parents speak out for themselves, so they speak out for themselves when they grow up." And I just think that's key. That's why we do it, right? That's our why. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this family engagement and leadership framework, maybe some of you on the call were involved in this, so please add that in the chat if you were. Let's go on. There's just a few things that I wanted to point out. Again, this resource is available for you, and there's a lot in there, but we decided to pull out just a few key pieces to share with you. And each of these slides has, it tells you which page you can find this information on, and there's lots more elaboration within the framework. So feel free to go along with me as I go through this. But the guiding principles can be found on page 7, and they demonstrate what family engagement and leadership look like when it's prioritized within organizations. So the principles allow agencies and coalitions to really evaluate their own practices and to encourage participating agencies to do the same. And in this way, parents really know what to look for when they're interacting with family serving organizations or agencies. And next slide, please. Partnerships across sectors. And so, as you know, family partnerships create improved system, program, family, and child level outcomes across early childhood sectors. Families are at the center, as you can see, and are viewed and treated as partners, not just people that we survey and ask for advice or to give input. Local agencies that were involved in the preschool development grant work convened a monthly group of cross-sector stakeholders. You can see examples of that here in this slide. And they all had a goal, and I believe they all reached it, to have a minimum of 20% family representatives in their local coalition. Some had more, some were completely made up of family leaders. So it can look different in each community. These local coalitions successfully worked to enhance ongoing relationships between family serving agencies and the parents and children that they serve. Thank you, Daphne. And so now we're on system level implementation, and you can see the pages 8 to 15 that this is really talked about within the framework. But the framework uses, well, actually the wheel was adapted from the Head Start Parent, Family, and Community Framework. So as you know, Head Start is just has family engagement leadership at their core, and also tying in other community agencies. So we learned a lot from them and based this wheel off of theirs. And the framework uses the term system to describe a network of organizations, programs, and services that interact around a common goal or a common set of outcomes. Early childhood system refers to the sectors, entities, and services which serve young children birth to 8. And it can include child care facilities, schools, healthcare providers, community providers, and so on. But here you'll see that the outer circle is the conditions for success. And those come from the study, the Center for the Study of Social Policy and Parent Engagement and Leadership. Agencies can use the descriptions under each condition to evaluate their organization's effectiveness or to shape their vision for family engagement. And then the inner circle you'll see are the system components. And there's a lot of information in the framework and specifically in the action guide around these system components. There's even on our website some videos where we interviewed some of the folks in cohort 1 who really shared with us how they're using these system components. And there are lots of them. Communities have decided or have chosen not try to tackle all of them at once, but maybe pick one or two that are really relevant to them. And those system components describe areas into which system aspects are organized and assessed. So system level organizational processes affect how well family engagement and leadership is provided, leading to better outcomes for families and children. Again, there's a lot more detail in this framework and action guide, so please check it out and feel free to ask us any questions. I know we have a lot to cover, but since we've touched on system level, I'm going to pass it now to Daphne, who's really going to kind of dive into that mindset of thinking systems level. So thank you.
So as Mary mentioned, we really talk about making the shift to systems thinking when we're talking about family engagement and leadership. So oftentimes it's really easy to get into our day-to-day work. It's really easy to stay in our silos that we work in. But we're challenged with family engagement and leadership to really think at the systems level. So moving up to think about all of the webs of relationships rather than just focusing on one particular piece or detail, but really looking at how events are seen across a pattern that is unfolding over time. And we've been working within the Smart Start Network with the Water Center for Systems Thinking. And so the next few slides that I'm going to share are from the Water Center. So one of the tools that they use is the Iceberg Model. So typically what we see are the events that happened at the top. You know, we often hear about the iceberg. There's so much below the surface that we can't see. And so when we think about systems thinking, what we see oftentimes is that top level. So we see families who potentially are not engaged in the work, or a child who is not showing up for preschool, or a family who isn't engaged in or who isn't attending our home visits, or is a no-show, or things like that. Those are the things that we see. But when we start to get deeper below the surface, we start to think about patterns of behavior. So what has happened over time? What are the trends showing us? What changes have occurred? And then digging a little deeper, we think about the structure of the system, what has influenced those patterns. I think oftentimes about the past couple of years with COVID, so many things have impacted the system. And then what are the relationships among the parts? How are all those connected? And then with this work, we really want to get to that bottom level where we're thinking about mental models, not only bringing family leaders to the table to understand what assumptions, beliefs, and values that family leaders hold, but also thinking about our own mental models and where are our values and beliefs and the assumptions about families in the whole process. And recognizing that we all have mental models, we all come to the table with different lived experiences, different backgrounds, and being willing to bring all of those to the table together to have conversations. So we thought about doing a breakout room where you could think through your individual system and what your individual system looks like. And then we found out how many people were registered for the session, and we decided that would not be a very good idea. So we just want to give you a couple seconds to think through what your system could look like. So if you have a piece of paper that you can jot some notes down on, think through these 4 questions with us. So what are 4 important elements or parts of your system? And elements could be people, it could be places, it could be curriculum, it could just be components of a home-based visiting model. It could be anything that you feel is important to the work that you do within what you define your system as. And then think through, what are 3 other systems that interact with or influence your system? And there's probably lots, but if you can just think through a few. And then what are 2 changes that your system is currently experiencing? Once again, I'm sure there's so many that you all can think of over the past couple of years, but what are 2 that come to mind initially? And then what is one goal or desired change that you're working on as a leader in your system? And we're going to go through a system just to give you an example of what this activity can look like. So if my system is early care and education, then as a early learning site, the early learning site itself would be an element of my system. Parents would be an element. The teacher and then the child would all be elements of the system. And then if we think about other systems that are influencing that system, that may be subsidy, if we're receiving subsidy from the Department of Social Services, licensing, so the Division of Child Development and Early Education is another system that is influencing and interacting with my system. And then technical assistance. So my local Smart Start partnership, hopefully, is also a system that is interacting with my system. And I'm sure these next two you all are very familiar with. So when we think about changes that we've heard a lot about from early care and education recently is staffing. So staff turnover, the challenges with recruitment, the challenges with retention, everything that goes into that. And then also low enrollment. So I'm starting to understand why enrollment is low and why staffing is the way that it is are two areas that we may consider as being challenges or decisions that we want to get parent leaders involved in. And then when we're trying to get to a goal or desired change, maybe that's a coordinated system. Once again, there's a lot of different goals or desired changes that you could have, but for us, we just decided to choose coordinated system. And so this is an example of what a system can look like. And then there's multiple places along the system where we can include family leaders in the decision-making process. So going back to the framework that Mary talked about, within our framework, we have a family engagement and leadership continuum. And I love, this is probably one of my favorite parts of the framework because I feel like it just lays out so perfectly the way that we hope that families are engaged in the work. And we start at the left side of the continuum with involvement. And so family leaders are recipients in the work. They participate in services. They're given information about available services. So if you think about a home-based visiting program, these are the families you're serving with home visits. They're the parents that are participating in those. If you're NC Pre-K, you're thinking about the parents who are bringing their children to NC Pre-K classrooms. And then moving along the continuum, we go to engagement. So parents are seen as consultant and partner. They're asked for feedback. Maybe they're given surveys. Maybe they're brought to parenting conferences and just asked for their opinions about how things are going. And then at the very end of the continuum, we have leadership, where families are change agents and they are influencing decisions and taking part in implementing actions, collecting and analyzing data and strategic planning. And what we like to point out here is that we need families at every part of this continuum. And so while we know that the services that we provide help to address toxic stress and help to buffer that and help to build protective factors, and the services that we provide are very, very, very important. And so we want families there. We also want families to give feedback and to respond to surveys when we send them out. But we also want to focus on the leadership and change agent part as well, so that we can make sure that families are truly involved in that decision-making component at the very end as well. And so the rest of our work is really going to focus on that leadership component, because we know that you all have tons of strategies for increasing involvement and engagement. But oftentimes what we see is left out of that conversation is the leadership piece. And so really making sure that we start to take a more intentional approach with including family leaders in the decision-making processes. So why does family leadership matter? So this analogy is a proverb where there's a group of individuals who are blindfolded. They were put in the room with an elephant. One person had the elephant's ear and was like, oh, this is a leaf. One person had his tail and was like, oh, this is a broom. But it wasn't until everyone who had a different part of the elephant was able to come together and say, oh, this is an elephant. And so oftentimes when we think about families, it really is that missing piece of the puzzle. And having them at the table can help us all to realize, oh, this is an elephant. And this is the approach that we need to take to start to change the conversation. So we know that including family leaders in the decision-making process, one, they're the experts on their own lives and experiences, and their perspectives are necessary in order for us to create effective and sustainable programs and solutions. And they help us to gain a better sense of, is the program working? Is it succeeding with what our intended goals and outcomes are? And what are the barriers? What are the challenges? If families are not included or not engaged in the intervention or not excited about the intervention, then why? What can we do to start to make it what they actually need? What improvements could be made? And how does this work intersect with the other needs and experiences of families? And then Mary mentioned this earlier, but nothing about us without us is a phrase that was taken out of the disability activism movement. And I get really excited about family leadership because I really see it as equity in practice. Because we know that those who oftentimes are directly impacted by the decisions that we're making have been historically left out of the decision-making process. And so this is really shifting power to the families, those who are most directly impacted by inequities, and giving them the power at decision-making tables to really guide and change the solutions that we're implementing or proposing. And so shifting power is all about equity. And so we see that, once again, both matter. Family engagement and family leadership both matter. Lived experience can translate into more impactful work. We also know that families are experts in their own lives, but not necessarily at policy tables, not necessarily in early childhood development. And so it really takes all of us working together to make all of those pieces fit and to make sure that the policies and changes that we're recommending are most effective and sustainable. And then those four at the bottom are the conditions for success that Mary mentioned. So being family-centered, equity-driven, collaborative, and transparent are critical to making sure that this work is successful. And on the right side of the screen is an example of the tools that we have created and that are on our website in conjunction with Moms Rising. And so we're very excited to have those resources available for all of you to use. So as I mentioned, there's lots of different places where decision-making happens in organizations. So if you can, for just a minute, and you can put this in the chat if you're able to, think through, where are your inclusion points? And when we say inclusion points, we're thinking about where are the places that you make decisions that impact children and families in your agency, in your work. If you're a parent educator, maybe that's deciding which topic you're going to cover with the family the next time you go on a home visit. If you're an agency director, maybe that's your board of directors, or maybe it's a program committee. There's tons of places where decisions are made. But if you can just include in the chat, where are your inclusion points? So where are decision-making processes happening in your organization, in your role, and where can you start to include family voice in those decisions? And Beth or Mary, if you want to, if there's anything in the chat, you can feel free to share.
I'm not seeing anything right now, Daphne. Oh, yes. Finding community resources, community advisory committees.
Yes, definitely.
I'm loving seeing so many more parent policy councils, so many more of these being added. Design of family resource guides, what to include, how to package it to be easily accessible, program management meetings, inclusion points committee membership, gathering info from parents in a variety of ways, hopefully bringing parents to boards, giving parents opportunities to reach out to other parents, parents as board members, home visitors, topics and education, referrals to community services and linkages, community focus groups for parents, meeting with the co-facilitator to debrief and plan the next session.
Perfect. Thank you.
There's so many more good ones coming in, Daphne. So
feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We can learn from each other for sure. So next we're gonna switch a little bit so that we can get into the how. And I'm gonna switch my screen here to a Mentimeter. So give me just a second. Make sure I don't hit the wrong button and lose you all. Okay. 1 second, let me get the link for you.
Let me know if I can help in any way, Daphne.
Thank you. All right, there's the link. So if you go to that link, and then let me advance. Okay, so using 1 to 2 words, describe how it feels to be unwelcomed or unwanted at a table. Hopefully you can see these coming through. Bad, shameful, rejected, awkward, uncomfortable, depressing, angering, silenced, isolated, language barrier, hurtful.
And in the chat, we have not belonging, powerless, inferior, lonely, less.
So I don't know about you all, but those are not words or feelings that I want to have. Even just reading them like we're virtual, I know, but it brings the mood in the room down. And those are not things that we like to feel, and those are not feelings that we want our families to feel either. So to bring the mood back up, let's switch it. Using 1 to 2 words, describe how it feels to be welcomed or wanted at a table. Empowering, valued, accepted, respected, joyful, inspired, energizing, heard, included, validated, hopeful, important.
Respected is coming up a lot in the chat too, Daphne, and heard, loved, comforting, strong, joyful, empowering, appreciated, seen, included. understood.
Awesome, thank you. So those are all positive feelings and emotions. Those are definitely things that I want to feel when I'm entering a space, when I'm coming into a room, when I'm coming to a decision-making table. And there's such important places to start when we're thinking about family engagement and leadership, in terms of making sure that our families feel welcomed and comfortable at decision-making tables, because as Beth is going to talk about, the power of their stories is so important to moving this work forward. And if we don't have a space where they feel welcomed, at least for me, if I don't feel welcomed in a space, I'm not going to be very willing to share my story or excited about sharing my story. So just keep that in your mind as we move forward. I'm going to try to share my screen again. In just a second. All right, so one more activity to do in the chat really quickly. So think of a time that you have gone to a friend or family member's house, and you just knew when you walked in that that family member or friend had really taken time to prepare for your arrival. They had your favorite drink. They had something for your children to do. And they'd really taken the planning seriously, and they'd really taken the time to think through what you felt would make you feel welcomed or important. So share in the chat, what did they do, or how did it make you feel? And I always share this example. I have a friend. I'm seeing a lot of friends from Rockingham County on here. But I have a friend from Rockingham County. And when I go to her house, she knows what my favorite drink is. It happens to also be her favorite drink, but I mean, she doesn't always have to have it in the refrigerator. But when I come there, she always has it available. And she has always thought through some activity for our children to do together. So she has 2 girls, I have 2 boys, and she's always thought through something that they can do together. And so not only has she taken the time to think through what we liked as a family, but she's also invested in it. So she's gone out, she's purchased the drink, she's purchased activities, she's done things to really plan and think through all of those different components to us visiting. So just thinking about how that makes us feel when we know that somebody has really taken the time and energy to pre-plan is important.
I love that. That's a great example. There's so many great things in the chat that you'll have to come back and see when you can look on your screen. A lot of people said loved and special. And then some people are even given specifics about what they would want. Wine or chocolate, or parent or children with someone else for the evenings, things like that. So there's some great examples on here.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Beth Messer-Smith from Moms Rising. So as Mary mentioned, as we moved out of the work in 2019, one of the things that we heard over and over is just the importance of being able to have tangible tools and resources and training on the how of family engagement and leadership. And I wasn't here for that process, but I'm pretty sure it was really easy to say Moms Rising is the one that we need to turn to. They got it. They know how to do this. And so it's been a wonderful partnership and collaboration with Moms Rising to pull these resources and tools together. So excited to have Beth here today to be able to share some of those with you all.
Thank you, Daphne. And I am feeling all the warm fuzzies because you called me your friend. We actually met in a different life doing parent advocacy work together. And I'm grateful for the real friendships and the relationships that come from doing this work in ways that are authentic. So yeah, thank you, Daphne. You kind of made my morning there. So here in North Carolina, Moms Rising has been doing this work since 2008. I came to this as a parent advocate myself of a preemie, a 31 weeker by the time he was born. But what we find with Moms Rising is that a lot of the things that we get asked is to help bring parent voices to spaces. For a long time, we were pushing hard to get recognition that it was important to have parent voices in spaces. When we started doing this work in 2008, family engagement was not the catchphrase. At almost every table, we had to push and fight and struggle to get parent voices included in decision-making processes. And it's so incredibly exciting to see so much interest in folks wanting to do that and do it in ways that are meaningful and authentic. Sometimes when we connect parents to these kinds of opportunities, they're wonderful and empowering experiences like you all described in the Mentimeter. Other times, parents don't have, or family leaders don't have empowering experiences. And I end up having these conversations with them afterwards about what happened. How do they feel? And someone said in the chat that they don't want to do it anymore. That's true. I've had parent experiences where folks are like, I tried, I put in a lot of time and it just didn't work. And so we were really excited when Smart Start came forward with this opportunity to really talk about how do we involve parent voices? How can we get some of the lessons learned out there? So here you can see all these different tools that we've put together. The goal was that these would be user-friendly. They would be the kinds of things that you can print out and fill out at your desk or out in the field. And they all are informed by reaching out to families that we've worked with. And parent leaders who really have given us their input. So please do check those out, use them. They're intended to be very user-friendly. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the difference between what makes for a positive experience for family leaders and what doesn't, it really is, as Daphne was giving that example with the friends you visit, a lot of it's about planning. In early childhood, we know that building a strong foundation leads to long-term success, right? The same thing is true when we're talking about engaging family leaders. The more thoughtful and intentional you are about planning and investing early and in getting that table ready for family leaders to be part of it, the better outcomes you're going to have and the better experience the family leaders are going to have. We don't have time to walk through all the materials, but I wanted to flag a few important pieces for you to remember. So first, your success is going to be rooted in how much you get the ground ready, how much you have organizational commitment and buy-in. Do the staff members who are involved understand why we're bringing in family leader engagement and the role that they're going to play? Is the board bought in? Do partners understand the role of family leadership and recognize the different types of expertise that family leaders bring? Have you had those conversations? We often talk about that our budgets should reflect our values, right? And so have we budgeted for staff support time? Because oftentimes we don't think about, it is going to be an additional task. It's going to be extra time built in, not just recruiting family leaders, but supporting them throughout the process. And have we budgeted for that? Have we talked about stipends to help support family leaders in being able to participate? This is an equity issue, especially when we're engaging folks from low wealth communities. It really is important to try to be able to compensate them and support them for their time. Have we budgeted for resources to overcome barriers? Have we looked at costs of interpretation, translation, childcare, space rentals, things like that really have to be planned for ahead of time? And just a couple of things that I would encourage you to consider as you do your planning. You're going to want to ask yourself, what are you hoping to gain from having family leaders at the table? What are you hoping that the family leaders themselves will gain for having been part of the process? Why is it important to have family leaders involved in this part of your organization's work? How will their input be reflected in the final decision-making? What kind of decision-making power do they actually have? What support are you able to provide to those who are participating? Those barriers that we were talking about beforehand, and do you have the staff capacity to support them fully? Next slide, Daphne. Thank you. As we talk about it, family leadership support is not a one-time thing. It really is an iterative process that builds on itself, and it requires that dedicated time to develop relationships. Parents, when we asked family leaders about what they would like to say about this, they said they need to be rooted in trust and they need to feel authentic. I don't know if folks have heard of the term relational organizing versus transactional organizing before, but it really is this notion that effective family leadership is rooted in building relationships with each other. Relational organizing is about creating relationships that are not about meeting a particular short-term goal necessarily, but they're about growing trust, they're about growing skills, they're about changing culture internally and externally. Or on the other side, transactional organizing really is seeing family leaders as a means to an end. The most common feedback that I hear from family leaders is who didn't have a good experience is, I felt like I was there just to check a box. I was there because the grant required family leadership engagement, not because they really wanted to hear what I had to say, right? And that's something none of us want to be involved in being part of. But the reality is that relational organizing takes more time, and it takes emotional bandwidth, and it takes vulnerability on our part in building those relationships. But it really is going to be what makes the difference. Next slide, please. So when I talked about that iterative process, just for an example, if you're building a decision-making table that you want to have family leadership input in, there are a lot of different steps you're going to be talking about. You're going to be talking about your recruitment meeting. You're going to be where you really sit down and explain with the person what's happening. Why do you want them there? Then after that, once they say yes, you're going to have a more in-depth getting to know you meeting where you hear their story, where you talk about their experiences, where you start to answer some of those questions that they may have about the background and the history of the work that you're doing together. We believe that you should have brief check-ins before every meeting. This is where you've sent out the materials, you do a check-in that said, hey, the meeting's coming up, want to go through the materials with you, see if you had any questions. See if you have thoughts about where you might want to jump in and share some of your experiences, and just kind of being that thought partner. And again, doing something similar after the meeting. How did you feel like it went? Did you feel heard? What would you like to have seen done differently next time? And that cycle is going to keep continuing for every meeting that you have. And then you'll want to kind of have kind of bigger picture check-ins along the way. Next month, I'm getting ready to start a whole round, and Daphne, I'm going to be starting a whole round of conversations with members, right? Going out and having these one-on-ones about, okay, so what are you thinking about? What are you concerned about? What would you like to see us be doing differently as an organization in the next year? And that's going to be ongoing. The one thing I want to circle back with about recruitment is oftentimes what we see is parents of convenience being involved. Being recruited, folks that you already have a relationship with, that it's easy to pull in. Maybe you know them from another role. Maybe they work at a partner organization and they also happen to be a parent, right? That's great if they're the right family leader for that experience. What we suggest that you do is you think about what is the decision being made, and that you kind of draw circles around that, right? So what you really want to be doing is recruiting and including those folks who are most directly affected by the decisions who are going to be made, that are going to be made. People want to know that they're actually the right person for the job, not just the easiest person to ask, right? Because they want to feel like they really have something to contribute, and you thought that their input was particularly important. And there's more materials about recruitment on the website, but I think it's really important to think about who are you wanting to ask and why. Next slide, please, Daphne. We talk a lot at Moms Rising about the art of the one-to-one, because we really do feel like there's an art form to building these kinds of relationships. And it does takes time, it takes emotional connection, it takes being vulnerable, and sometimes being willing when you can to share some of your own story and your own experiences of what brought you to the work or what motivates you in the work to keep doing it. Family leaders suggest or mention to us that really the tone of voice people use is really important. Does it feel like you're talking to a peer, or does it feel like there's a power dynamic at play? We'll talk more about this in a minute, but especially when you're talking about bringing family leaders in where their children are served by the programs that you're running, there's a lot of vulnerability and a lot of risk in that for family leaders, because there's a fear of, if I say the wrong thing, or if I make the wrong person uncomfortable, or if I criticize the program in some way, that's going to have a ramification on my child. That's going to impact the kinds of services our family gets. And so that requires a lot of risk for folks. It's something family leaders bring up to me all the time. And being aware that past experiences that folks have had with other organizations may impact their comfort level in being able to engage with you. And so having those conversations, viewing them as building a relationship, taking the time is really important, and that it's an investment that is necessary to making this work useful. Next slide, please. The other thing that always comes up when we're talking with family leaders is barriers. One thing I hear sometimes from partner organizations is, well, we recruited the family leaders and they said they were going to come, but then they didn't show up. They didn't come to the meetings. They said they were going to, but they didn't. And we'll talk about, well, what did you do to remove the barriers to make it possible for them to come and participate? Barriers can be anything that inhibits someone's engagement, anything that keeps someone from participating. And we can't, we may have some ideas of what some of those barriers might be, but we really can't ever assume what they are. And so what we at Moms Rising suggest is that when you're doing those check-ins, when you're having those one-to-ones, is really the time to say, hey, so are there any things that would make coming to the meetings hard for you? Like, are there times of day that work better? Are there locations? What's your childcare situation going to be like? And having some of those conversations individually, because we just really don't know. And also barriers can shift over time. We saw this tremendously within the pandemic, right? The models we were using where we met in person and the ways we had come up with to remove those barriers didn't address the technology needs. Sometimes people didn't have access to technology. Sometimes they needed tutorials on how to make Zoom work. And so being able to really be in conversation about what are those barriers and be proactively and iteratively trying to address them. Next slide, please. These are some of the barriers that come up frequently. Time, it can be very difficult for folks to do it during the time of day, or if you're having it during the workday, yes, that may be easiest for those of us who do this professionally, but for folks who have another 9-to-5 job or who are the primary family caregiver during that time, it can be really difficult. Difficult to do. When I started doing this work with my child, he was very young. And at that point, there were meetings that the culture was not where I could bring my child with me. So I was, as a volunteer, paying for childcare to try to be able to go to those meetings. And it was just not possible, right? So how do we create welcoming environments? Have we talked to them about what their ability to miss work is? That's where the stipends can help come in and offset some of the cost if they have to take time off. Language barriers, feelings of safety and trauma, that's some of that risk we were talking about earlier. Really being clear about how we create a safe space for folks, a brave space, as one of my colleagues says, where people really can feel comfortable and know that they're going to be trusted, and that they can trust that they'll be protected. Also accessibility. I was on a call yesterday. We're planning a training that involves families of children with special needs. We want to make sure that there are captions on all the Zoom meetings, right? So that people who have hearing loss can hear that or can read that. So just thinking things through and really talking about what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about ahead of time. And to go back to Mary's quote from earlier about bringing their children, one of the things that Moms Rising really tries to do is that we try to create spaces where children are always welcome and wanted and appreciated. At the same time, creating opportunities for parents to be able to have adult conversations, right? So we'll try to have activities going with licensed childcare folks on the side who are helping provide those activities, or we'll do an activity at the legislature where children are welcome, because there is something about giving people an opportunity for their children to see their parents as advocates and growing up and feeling their own voice and power. And that it's one of the greatest joys of my work is seeing my children as teenagers starting to advocate for themselves and advocating for their friends because they've seen how it works, right? Next slide, please. One of the other things we talk about a lot is decision making. I mean, if we're bringing family leaders in to have input in decision making, but at the end of the day, they feel like their input didn't affect the decision, it's incredibly disempowering. And is one of the leading reasons folks are like, you know what, I'm done. I've put in my time. They didn't hear what I said and I'm done. So I want to pause for a moment and get your all's input. When you think about decision making, what makes you feel good about a decision-making process and its outcomes? When you're invited to a table, what makes you feel like it was worth your time? So if you could just put those in the chat. I'll give folks a second. the suggestions are acknowledged. Yes, that you were listened to, that your voice is heard, acknowledged, considered. Many people are heard, where everyone has given their input and the group has discussed every aspect. You are engaged. People have a chance to share. There's space for it. Sharing and learning. Not just constantly having meetings, but taking action to see the work. Ideas affirmed, being heard, included, respect for the leader that are listening and facilitating. Yeah. Dialogue that's meaningful and inclusive. Even if a decision doesn't go how I wanted, I'm offered an explanation of why. Willing to continue participating, all participating. Steps are assigned. Yeah. People agreeing. And the outcome is just true to the original purpose. These are all great. Quiet listening. Thoughts not being addressed or sugarcoated. Yes. Feeling valued. Yep. Everyone can share and next steps are planned. These are all great. I think we've all been in spaces where we really felt like it mattered that we were there. And we've probably all been in spaces where we're like, why did I spend my time doing this, right? And so I think that really how we make sure that that's the case for parents and family leaders is really important. And just a couple things I wanted to lift up that I saw in here, making the space for people to be heard. We do have something in one of the tools that's about how do we elevate different voices and make room for different folks to be heard, because one of the things family leaders say is everyone kept talking and there was just no space for me to work my way in, right? And especially when power dynamics feel different or someone's new to a space, having that opportunity where people like step up and step back, right? To make room for people to be heard. Or we say, okay, hey, we really want to hear from the folks who are most directly affected right now. And we intentionally make space for voices to be heard can be really important. Just a couple of things to think about when you're talking about decision making. First, making sure that everyone has a shared understanding of the decision-making power of the group. What is within this group's authority to decide? Is it an advisory group where that input will be going back and the decision will be made somewhere else? Are we just making recommendations? Is the final decision going to be made here? Does this group have budgeting authority to make those sorts of things so that everyone goes into the conversation knowing what's possible, right? Another one being the decision-making process itself. Did everybody in the room have input into choosing what the decision-making process looks like? Is it going to be just a majority rule where everyone votes? Is it going to be consensus building? What does that look like? And then what approach do you have to make sure that at the very end, when the decision's being made, that you screen it to make sure, okay, is parent voice and input reflected in this before we move forward? One of the other important pieces is making sure that everyone has the same information and the same background. One of the pieces I've heard from folks is they've been invited to a meeting, but there's kind of this history or shared background and understanding that perhaps some of the professionals in the room share, and it's just it wasn't formally shared, it's just knowledge that people have, right? But it may not be knowledge that the family leader has, because they don't do this on an everyday basis. And so making sure that everyone in the room has the information needed and necessary to make the decisions that are being asked of them, and that they have it in enough time to review it beforehand and think about questions is really important, because it makes a difference in terms of whether everyone's starting that conversation on equal footing. And I'm saying, if you ask a parent to come to a meeting, you should be prepared for their relevant stories, whether you like them or not. Yes, meeting them where they are and working with them until they're need to be able to successfully advocate. I agree with that. And it's one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit in the do's and do nots, is the willingness to be uncomfortable, right? That sometimes some of the things that a family leader may share, especially if they're feeling brave enough and the space is safe enough for them to feel honest in sharing their experiences, it may not be exactly what we wanted to hear, or it may not go along with what we thought was the case. But that doesn't mean it's not true. And that doesn't mean that that perspective isn't necessary, but it does require kind of being willing to lean in and be a little uncomfortable, and know that being willing to share that experience also was probably uncomfortable for the family leader, right? And so making sure it's a conversation is really important. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So we've spent a lot of time talking with family leaders, not just here in North Carolina, but we worked really closely with our partners in New Hampshire on this. We talked to our partners in Washington State. We talked to folks, just all over the country about what have been their experiences and what would they really want folks doing family engagement to think about. So I'm going to, next slide, please. There's a lot of them listed here. You'll be getting the PowerPoint, but I wanted to lift up some of the ones that come up over and over again. Making sure we're removing barriers. Don't treat family leaders as a rubber stamp or a checkbox. Don't tokenize parents. Don't have just one family leader from at the table or one family leader from a particular type of background at the table. I always say you need to have a minimum of 3 family leaders at any decision-making table, because odds are someone may have to be out, and you need to have backup for folks. Valuing their time with stipends, but also with making sure that you're supporting them with childcare and other things. Recognizing lived experience. Someone told me that even the bios and the introductions can be really intimidating. If that's your first intro to a space, one way to kind of democratize that in a little bit is saying, what is it that brings you to this work? Or something that everyone can share personally, or like what motivated you to do this work, or tell me about an adult who made a difference in your life when you were a child. Something that everybody can share makes a big difference. Making sure you're providing that background info, avoiding jargon. I love the early learning space, but we have so many acronyms, y'all. There's so many acronyms, and sometimes I'll be sitting in a meeting going, I should know what that means. I'm really embarrassed. Everyone else here seems to be nodding and knowing what that means. And even for me, it can be embarrassing to be like, so what was that? So doing our best to avoid jargon. Sometimes we say appoint a jargon watcher in a meeting, who's the person who can interrupt and say, hey, that means so-and-so. So it isn't always the family leader having to ask, right? Making sure that there are clear expectations. At Moms Rising, sometimes we use a family leader agreement that explains what we're going to be expecting of the family leader, but also what they can expect from us. And then we both sign that. It's something that it affirms to them that yes, they're making commitments here, but we're also making commitments to them for being part of this process. Making reasonable expectations. If you're doing this online, making it, saying, you know what, you're at home, you're in your family space, your child may wander in, that's okay. I hate it when on a meeting and I hear a family leader feeling like they have to apologize for a child being in the space when they're there to talk about children, right? Like we need to normalize that's completely okay. Recognizing that there can be trauma involved. We're asking sometimes people to talk about things that are really hard and can be really painful. And some of our stories, no matter how many times we've told them, are still hard. And so making safe spaces for that, and also making spaces that if someone doesn't feel like sharing their experience right now, they're not pressured to, right? Because they own that experience and that story. And then committing to being uncomfortable and, to leaning in and doing the work and taking the feedback. I organized a meeting where someone was sharing their birth story, and a medical professional in the space said, well, that's not how that would have happened. You don't know. She's like, I was there, you don't know. And so questioning the authenticity of someone's experience, it may not be how you would have perceived it, but it is how they experienced it, right? And so being able and willing to hear that is really important. Next slide, please. And a lot of these are similar, the not being a rubber stamp or a checkbox, not putting family leaders on the spot. I think that's one of the things people will turn to you. So what do the parents think? Well, it's hard to feel like, that's a lot of pressure to feel like, especially if you're the only family leader, that you have to speak for all families, right? You can share your experience. And if a family leader isn't speaking up, it may be because they're not feeling comfortable. And, part of that is what can be addressed in check-ins afterwards. What would make you feel more comfortable sharing your experience? And another piece is that we need to make it so that people don't have to fit into certain norms. They don't have to talk a certain way. They don't have to dress a certain way in order to be taken seriously and their expertise valued. It is a heavy load to carry. It's a lot, and it can be really intimidating for family members. So being able to say, we want you to show up how you are. Maybe you're just coming from work, right? However you're able to show up in this space, we appreciate you and we value you and we want you here. And you're an important part of the work that we're doing. And I guess the last thing I would say is that it's really important not to share family leaders' stories without their permission. Folks may feel comfortable sharing their story in a space, but they may not be comfortable with you going out and sharing their story somewhere else, right? And so having explicit permission, within your guidelines of how are we going to handle the information that we share in this space, because that can be really important. Next slide, please. So we can do, this is one of my favorite slides. We can do all these things. We can do all the preparation. Yes. And Will Murray says, don't ask them to share if you haven't explicitly talked about it beforehand. Yes, don't put a parent on the spot, right? 100%. So we can do a lot of the things in the background to do all of our preparation, but the magic is really only going to happen when the family leaders themselves feel empowered and ready to flex their own power, right? Like that's when you start to see the change in spaces. Next slide, please. So I want to take just a second and think about what makes you feel powerful in a space? What makes you feel able to make change and to speak up and maybe to share your own experiences or stories? And if you could just maybe put that in the chat about passion. Yeah. What else? Is there something people do that makes you feel more comfortable to speak up? Trust. Feeling safe. Being prepared. Having those materials beforehand, right? We especially hear that from Spanish speaking folks, making sure they get the materials that they can read in time. Feeling safe, being prepared, trust, knowing other people, encouraged. Humor puts you at ease. Yeah. Trust. Not feeling judged, understanding the acronyms. Yeah. Icebreakers, so you can get to know each other. Yeah. So we all know all these things intrinsically, right? We know them because we feel them as people ourselves. Eye contact. Yep. Yeah. So next slide, please. There's a lot of things that we know how to do. The way we would want to be treated coming into a brand new space are the ways we really can and should be treating these family leaders too. I love that you mentioned eye contact. It's hard it's harder in virtual spaces, but like in meetings, like saying, yeah, that was a great point, right? Or in a virtual meeting, I'll send a text. I love that you said that, or a private chat, or thank you for lifting that up, right? Just those ways we can encourage. One of the big things that family leaders bring to the table is their experiences, their stories. And at Moms Rising, we know that in fact, stories make change. They make policy change. They are critical to moving policies forward. And we all have stories. We all don't have just a single story. We have lots of different stories, right? And so helping, one of the things that the support people who are working with family leaders can do in these one-on-ones that happen before the meetings is spending a little time talking about our stories, talking about the power of those stories, and helping the family leader think through what do they want to share and how do they want to share it and how do they want to own that story. So for example, thinking about a time you had a personal experience that made you want to change something. I'll give you an example. I was doing voting rights work. I was 28 weeks pregnant with my first child. I woke up one morning, I couldn't lift my head from the pillow. I had severe preeclampsia. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. My son was born at 31 weeks. He almost died multiple times. And while I sat there, I left my job so I could sit by his NICU bed every day, right? And I saw that parents were not coming in until 6:30, until dinner time, because the vast majority of folks here in North Carolina, only 12% of workers have access to paid family and medical leave, right? And so that lit this passion in me that I wanted to change that. So I believe that every worker, no matter who you work for, deserves to be able to be both good employees and to be there for our family members when they need us, right? And that's why I'm advocating for paid family and medical leave for all North Carolinians, for all folks in this country, all workers. That's my story. That's what brought me to this work. I have lots of other stories, right? But I've told that story so many times to policymakers. I've also told the story of my needing family leave to help my mom fight cancer. We all have stories, and helping the family leaders that we're talking with work through what their stories are and how they want to share them and how they want to navigate that is so important. We have a fact sheet that is on the website that you can look at that helps people tell those stories. It's actually a Mad Lib, which I don't know if any of you all are from the 80s like I was, but I loved Mad Libs, and they can help us tell our own stories. Yep, here's an example of it. And we also have a video that explains some of this. So please check that out. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to talk about is that it can feel cheesy, but really a huge part of the work that we do in supporting family leaders is being their cheerleader, right? And I would say all of us have that person in our lives. I hope all of us have that person in our lives who is our cheerleader, our encourager, our supporter. And I want you to just take a minute, maybe put it in the chat if you feel like it. What do they do that makes you feel and own your own power? Who's that person for you, and what do they do? Y'all are sharing so much wisdom in the chat about taking notes about the story for the first time, sending note back to the parents. We do that too. I love that, Alexandra. You have a colleague who does it for you. So they were an example for me. They showed you the way to go. Yes, a friend who does that. Family members. Friends, yep. Family. Staff members who affirms they're hearing you. Mentors, coworkers. So I'm going to tell you a really funny brief story, which is that this morning I woke up with butterflies. When I saw how many of you were registered to be in this workshop today, I've done this workshop so many times, but I had all these butterflies. And I was talking to my daughter on the way to middle school this morning in carpool, and I said, we were going through our days, and I said, I'm feeling a little nervous about this, right? And my middle schooler goes, Mama, you've got this. I've heard you do this one before. You know what you're talking about. It's going to be great. I know you're going to be great. And she gave me this little pep talk, right? She didn't have to, but she did. And she made me feel a lot better, right? But I think we all have those people that you've got this. I'm in your corner. I'm cheering for you. It can feel cheesy, but it is probably one of the most important things we can do for each other, right? Next slide, please. So just when you were in that cheerleading role, thinking, yeah, they've seen your worth without you having to tell them. Yes, right. Your 3-year-old's your cheerleader. It's true, right? Colleagues, it makes us feel different, right? It makes us feel powerful, even when we might not be feeling powerful ourselves, right? So some of the things you can remind these family leaders why they were personally asked to participate in the first place. What are they bringing to this conversation that you all really need, right? So reminding them of their personal value, emphasizing the unique expertise they bring, the value their voice will add, how it's going to change things, and also continuing to provide that encouragement during the meetings, whether it's saying out loud, I'm so glad you brought up that point, or, that's dead on, right? Or taking those breaks and saying, I was so glad you raised that. It makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like it was worth contributing. So I'm going to go ahead and close so we have time for some questions. Next slide, please, Daphne. But we are here as a resource. Moms Rising, I love working with Smart Start. I love working with local Smart Starts. You all are on the ground, in the communities with the families, and doing such really critical work. So if there are places we can help support you, please reach out to me. We can schedule a phone call. We'd love to be part of lifting up, because we at the core, we have common concerns, right? We all want the very best for our children and families. So thanks for having me here. I'll turn it over for questions. Courtney, I don't know if you want to.
Yes, we had some great discussion in the chat, but I didn't see any questions that haven't been addressed.
Do folks have any questions for us that you want to just raise now, or anything you'd like to hear more about? Thank you all for we do hope you'll check out Moms Rising's website. We appreciate you all. Thank you. And thank you for the love in the chat. You're giving me all that encouragement. I appreciate it. I'm going to carry that into the rest of my day. I guess the one question I would add and ask you all is, if you download the tools, if you have thoughts when you're using them, I would love to hear those thoughts, because we're constantly iterating on the work that we do. So that would be helpful. Thank you. Someone asked me in a private chat if these slides are available in Spanish. Some of them are. So we can work on getting you some of the tools. If you want to email me, I'll put my email in the chat, and we can help connect you to some of these resources that are available in Spanish. And if you are working with Spanish-speaking family leaders, my colleague Shayla, who was supposed to be here today but is not feeling well, she does Spanish language organizing as a native Spanish speaker herself, and we would really love to have you on. And thank you, Alexander, for raising that. Mamas con Poder is a community of Spanish language speaking parents who are working across a variety of issues that affect families. And so Shayla leads that work, and she can and does do trainings in Spanish. So we'd love to have the opportunity to talk with you all about that. I'm seeing, after going through the training for family leaders and creating the action plan, what is a good way to transition from training and building up to them being more active in the community, telling their story, advocating for their family and children? So that's a great question. You know, it depends on what kind of advocating they're wanting to do. You know, with our family leaders, we provide ongoing training opportunities. One of them is working with them about if they want to share their story with the media, right? Helping do some media training, helping them, you know, as Alexander had talked about, helping take some notes and helping them kind of perfect what they'd like their story to be. If they want to share it on social media, helping them kind of think through the best ways to do that. We also will do advocacy 101 trainings and civics 101 trainings, where we talk about how policies are made in like at the state level, at the federal level, and where family voices can really make a big difference in that. And we'll talk about things about, okay, going and meeting with a lawmaker and sharing your story with a lawmaker, or effective phone calls, or how to raise questions about your issues at town hall meetings, things like that. So we do have other trainings that are kind of ongoing, and we'd love to talk with you about that, Lisa, or others, if you're interested in some of that conversation, because the goal is really, I don't know about you all, have you heard about the ladder of engagement? I'm sure people have heard about that. You know, you bring people in and you build on it, and they go to the next step and they go to the next step. Well, at Moms Rising, we actually prefer to talk about the rainbow of engagement, because the reality is that for family leaders, sometimes you can step up, right? And sometimes life is crazy and you can step back, and you often can't anticipate when that's going to be, right? And so one of the big things we talk about with family leaders is that we have a no guilt approach to doing the work, knowing that you always have a space and there's room for you, and we welcome you when you can. And when your life has gone a little sideways, we get that, because our lives go a little sideways sometimes too. And we will be here when you come back. And so, and that every action, if all you can do is click on a petition, that's important. If you can come to the legislator, that's important. But they build on each other, right, to make a rainbow, right? And that we don't want to prioritize for someone who, you know, may have less time. It's just as important, whatever they can do. Let's see.
Can I add one thing there, Beth?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that Beth highlighted so well is the importance of having a range of opportunities and really capitalizing on the strength of the parent leaders that you're working with and figuring out where their passions are, because that's where they're going to feel the most energized, and it's where they're going to be most effective. And so if you're thinking about from a local partnership standpoint, maybe you have a variety of different programs and services that you're offering that have different decision-making tables. And so thinking through which tables are available that they could participate in and be at, and offering them the option of where they want to tell their story and where they want to be a part of that process is important.
And I'm seeing things in the chat. Thank you for that, Daphne, because it really is. We call it layer cake organizing, because we like cake, but it all builds on each other, right? So when we can build together. For the Mamas con Poder, if you're interested in getting more involved with Mamas con Poder, email me at Beth at Moms Rising, and I'll connect you up with Shayla so we can can make that happen. Suggestions on how to engage with elected officials on the needs of children and families. I'll tell you what I like the most with family leaders is reaching out to an elected official, whatever level they're at, and seeing if we can meet with them in their community. I know that during the pandemic that was harder, but more elected officials are getting comfortable doing it. I like to meet, get, no more than 5 or 6 folks at a time, and bring them to meet with a lawmaker at a coffee shop. And I will do a pre-meeting beforehand. So we pick out these folks, and then we'll come together and have a conversation about this is what we're trying to, this is our goal. Who's going to be the person who starts us off? Who's going to be, what story is each of us going to share? Who's going to be the person that makes the ask for us? And we usually will do a little role play. Sometimes maybe where I pretend I'm the legislator, and then they go through their stories and the presentation. And I think the power dynamics are so different in your own community versus when you're in Raleigh, and it's just so much more accessible for families. And we do trainings on that. So Connie, if that's something that would be, or not Connie, let's see, who was that? That was S. Sharp. If that's helpful, I'd love to talk to you about that. But I think bringing family leaders directly to meet with lawmakers, and we also do it via Zoom. We've done a lot of them during the pandemic via Zoom. So I hope that's helpful.
I'll add too, as a parent who has gone with a variety of different organizations, one being Moms Rising, to talk to elected officials. I think one of the things that was really helpful for me in the beginning was realizing that you don't have to do it alone, and finding organizations that are passionate about the work that that you're passionate about, and that you can really work together on and learn from others who have been doing this work for a long time. Is really helpful. And so one of the first things I did was I attended Strolling Thunder, which was a Think Babies North Carolina and Moms Rising work. We got to push our kids around in strollers around the legislative building. And that was a great opportunity to just break families in that hadn't been a part of that process before, because there were so many others who were very well versed in having conversations with elected officials there.
And if I can throw out, thank you for that, Daphne. We have a date. My next meeting, actually, right after this, is about Strolling Thunder. We're going back to the legislature for the first time since COVID on June 9th, and we're going to be flying kites at the legislature. So people can bring their kids, they can fly kites. We can have lawmakers fly kites with us, and we can talk about policies that lift families, right? So come join us.
Hi. Can I share about something I put in the chat?
Sure, Alexandra.
We had an early childhood family leadership conference on last month, April 23rd. And I hope some of you here on the call already knew about that and supported family leaders in going. But even if not, I put together a list of family leadership resources on this Google Doc that I put into the chat. And that includes Moms Rising there and has Beth and Shayla's contact information, but lots of other resources for families who are interested in diving into family leadership. So there's Think Babies, NC Child, there's national groups. There's also an overview of just the early childhood resources, some of the primary early childhood services, so that families can kind of get a sense of this system of resources that that is in place to serve families and young children. So I thought I'd just offer that.
Thank you, Alexandra. I just downloaded it. So thank you.
And please let me know if you see if there's something that you think needs to be added there.
All right. Well, thank you all for being with us this morning. It was great to share our morning with you.
Thank you. I guess we'll turn it back over to Courtney or Yvonne, because I think there's a raffle drawing, so don't leave just yet.
Yes, thank you all so much. And I will welcome Yvonne to do the raffle drawing, but just wanted to point out that I have shared the survey for today, as well as the full conference survey in the chat. And please share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Daphne, Mary, and Beth for a wonderful session. Such great information. I love the upcoming event for the strollers and kites. That's really cool. I wish I could attend that, but that's great. Maybe soon I have a grandchild that I can come and participate. Another grandchild. So wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending this session. We have a wonderful gift from Lakeshore Early Learning. I don't want to keep too much of your time. And that grand prize is a Sensory Star beanbags, a set of 6 from Lakeshore Early Learning. And today's winner is Miss Juanita Brown. Ms. Brown, if you're still with us, congratulations. If not, I'll get in touch with you so that we can get your mailing information. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session with Lakeshore at 11:45. You can hear my alarm going off for that session. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.